FIFA President João Havelange was nearly 80 years old during the bidding campaign for the 2002 World Cup. He had been head of FIFA for over 20 years, and many thought he was getting past his sell-by date. But he was a man who oozed power, and in truth he had done much for the game. While he may have been respected, the Brazilian wasn't universally liked. Havelange's archenemy was Lennart Johansson, the Swedish head of UEFA, the powerful European federation, who was tired of seeing Europe make concessions to other federations, especially South America. Johansson disliked Havelange running FIFA like his own personal fiefdom, mainly because he wanted to run it like his own personal fiefdom. With Havelange firmly behind Japan's bid to host the 2002 World Cup, it was inevitable that Johansson would find a way to upset the president's plans, even if it meant cozying up to Korea. It was to be a game of politics, and Havelange had warned the Japanese to be careful of Korea's devious football chief, Mong-joon. The Japanese Football Association had been outmaneuvered by some underhand politicking from Chung when he became FIFA vice president in 1994. The JFA were described as amateurish in their efforts for not, let's say, influencing the right people in the right way to vote for the Japanese candidate. The FIFA Inspection Committee that passed through South Korea and Japan in October 1995 found it difficult to distinguish between the merits of the two countries' bid proposals. However, as the vote neared in the early months of 1996, doubts had been raised about South Korea's infrastructure and ability to stage the World Cup on its own. We believed that with the World Cup expanding to 32 nations, we were much stronger economically, Japan Football Association Vice President Kunishige Kawamoto said. Although the Koreans were successful with the Olympics, the World Cup is different as it's held all over the country, and we thought that South Korea might struggle to hold the World Cup on its own. UEFA, led by Johansson, looked at possible options. There weren't many: Japan, Korea, or co-hosting, and Japan was not an option for the ambitious Johansson. By April 1996, UEFA, prompted by the Asian Football Confederation, had decided that it would support co-hosting. The AFC was exasperated by the relentless bid campaigns, and it also came to the realization that if one country were to win out over the others, it would hurt rather than help the cause of Asian football. The AFC needed both South Korea and Japan, the two richest nations in East Asia, to help sustain the game in the region. Losing the bid would be a devastating blow to either country, affecting that country's development and their enthusiasm for football. South Korean Bid Committee Chairman Koo Pyong-hwae said it would be a humiliation if Japan got the World Cup. For the AFC, co-hosting would be a win-win situation. Knowing that the Japanese, with Havelange's prestige riding on their bid, would put up the most resistance to the idea of co-hosting, the AFC, aided by Johansson, targeted South Korea. While KFA President Chung still held out hope that South Korea could be awarded the entire World Cup, he realized that half a World Cup was a lot better than nothing. And nothing was definitely not an option for a man of Chung's pride and ego. The Koreans indicated that if the collective wisdom of football's powers decided that co-hosting was the best way out, then they would go with it. Johansson used his influence to persuade other members of the executive committee that co-hosting would be the best way out for football. According to one insider, Johansson had two motivations for backing co-hosting. One was to shaft Havelange, the other was to set a precedent for co-hosting, realizing that such a precedent would open up the World Cup to many more countries in Europe. With the 8 European votes at his disposal, plus Chung's own vote as an executive committee member, Johansson didn't need much help to swing things his way. In April 1996, UEFA met and decided to back co-hosting. That same month, UEFA representative Gerhard Ehner was sent to Cairo to speak to the African General Secretaries. Soon after, the African members of the executive committee, who had previously backed Japan, went along with UEFA's idea of backing co-hosting. As the vote neared, the final estimation was that Johansson controlled around 3/4 of the 21 votes on the committee. FIFA Vice President David Will wrote to me and said, "By the time the date for the decision had arrived, practically all of the executive committee held the view that co-hosting was the best of the alternative choices. On May the 30th, FIFA General Secretary Blatter phoned Shunichiro Okano, the head of Japan's bid committee, asking if the Japanese side would consider co-hosting. The Japanese delegation sought advice from former Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa, who suggested that they had little or no choice. It was half a World Cup or no World Cup. Finally, the Japanese realized they had been backed into a corner and sent a bitter reply to Blatter. We would consider the possibility of joint hosting if this is the wish of FIFA." According to press reports, it was Olympic chief Juan Antonio Samaranch who finally persuaded Havelange to back down. The game was up, and co-hosting ended the vicious campaigns for the 2002 World Cup. But it didn't end the fighting. At the very first meeting of the 2002 World Cup Organizing Committee, Havelange reportedly tried to give all the juicy parts of the World Cup to Japan. This included the opening game, the draw, and the final. Chung was having none of it. In the end, South Korea was given the opening game and the draw for the finals, while Japan was to host the preliminary draw and the final. Once the lines of demarcation were drawn, things proceeded fairly smoothly, and the respective organizing committees set about putting their swiftly revised plans into action. South Korean President Kim Dae-jung came to Japan and made a speech before the Diet, in which he said this was the start of a new cooperation between Japan and Korea. President Kim sped up the process of rapprochement with Japan, encouraging friendly relations, easing certain visa regulations, and opening up the country to Japanese culture, which had been banned outright in South Korea until 1999. However, there were two major hiccups in early 2001, one between the organizing committees and one between the two governments. While the official title of the tournament was the 2002 FIFA World Cup Korea-Japan, the Japanese claimed an agreement was reached early on with the Korean Organizing Committee's first chairman, Park Se-juk, that Japan could switch the names of the countries when written in the Japanese language. But objections were raised. Senior figures in the Japan Football Association blamed Chung for the problem, implying that he was trying to make political capital at a time when his family's business, Hyundai, was in severe trouble. Everyone else seems to have blamed FIFA, who not only insisted that the original word order remain unchanged, but also said that Japan must use its katakana phonetic alphabet when writing out the two countries' names, a linguistic faux pas on roughly the same level as the European Commission telling the British they must speak French. This prompted a headline in the Japan Times that read, "FIFA insults Japan." Japan Organizing Committee Secretary General Yasuhiko Endo agreed. "That was exactly right," he said. "FIFA should have tried to understand Asian culture, or at least tried to understand Japan and Korea before they awarded the World Cup to Japan and Korea." With pride in danger of precipitating a nasty fall in relations, FIFA pressured Japan into backing down, eventually saving face by taking the names of both countries off official documents. The second hiccup was an extension of the long-standing feud between Japan and South Korea over Japan's version of 20th century history. More than 50 years after the Second World War, Japan was still publishing history books that, at best, glossed over the war years, at worst, totally distorted them. South Korea suddenly demanded the revision of 8 junior high school textbooks approved by the Japanese government, claiming that they represented a distortion of history. Japan responded by noting that the books had been screened and approved by the Education, Science and Technology Ministry, and it stood by the contents of the books. While volumes of evidence have emerged concerning Japan's war crimes, including the rape of Nanking, the sexual enslavement of women, and its wartime experiments on live humans, the official line was that there was no clear evidence that such crimes had taken place. As the row escalated through April, South Korea recalled its ambassador from Japan. It lingered into the summer as the Koreans took a hard line over the issue, and nationalistic Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi also dug his heels in. There was no direct damage to the preparations for the World Cup, but the row demonstrated to the world the delicate relations between South Korea and Japan. In the shadow of this dispute, South Korea and Japan co-hosted FIFA's Confederations Cup in late May and June 2001, and got a taste of what co-hosting the World Cup might be like. Sepp Blatter, now president of FIFA, fell victim to the biggest potential problem of the World Cup: transportation. Blatter found it impossible to get a flight from the South Korean city of Ulsan, the headquarters of Mong-joon's Hyundai company, to Tokyo. There must be more airplanes from one country to another, the irritated FIFA boss whined. Of more concern to the organisers was the inability of the two co-hosts to sell out the opening and final games of the Confederations Cup, both against World Cup holders France. Other problems included volunteers who spoke English but knew nothing, a lack of TV coverage, both overzealous and apathetic security guards, cumbersome visa procedures, and beds that were too small for some of the players. FIFA declared the Confederations Cup a big success. Perhaps most surprising was the cooperation Japan and South Korea finally managed to pull off, partly because they came to realize that, history notwithstanding, they were not the problem. In the end, they realized they had a common cause and a common enemy: FIFA. Dealing with each other was far easier than dealing with FIFA. The awarding of the 2002 World Cup to two bitter enemies could have been a disaster, but even half a World Cup was a massive prize for both countries. In the end, the 2002 World Cup was a huge success, both in Japan and South Korea. FIFA could do nothing about that.